What's up, everybody? My name is PLD, and welcome to the PLD Projects channel, my little slice in the YouTube universe. And this is the debut episode, the maiden voyage of PLD Views. I'm trying to think if I should say it like that or not. It's kind of play on word. Well, it's play on word because this show is about my favorite sci-fi franchise outside of Star Wars, V. This is kind of be a very niche programming, I have a feeling. It's not exactly a well known franchise outside of kids from the 80s. Did have a reboot in late 2000s. I think it's still every once in a while you mention it, people go, oh, yeah, I kind of remember that. I remember there's a lizard baby. I remember they ate mice and they have vague recollections of it. Back in the day when it first came out, it was huge. But either way, it was big part of my childhood. And while I was always excited to see something new from Star Wars, when I heard news about V, I was even more excited because there's so few and far between. But I figured I'd do a little show on it, introduce you, my fellow viewers, into my world a little bit. Maybe you'll go find out more about it, take a chance on it. Not either way, I understand this is definitely going to be niche programming. Um, but a quick history for this, for both me and for the show. Uh, Back in, I'd say, the early 2000s, mid 2000s, I actually had a website where I was doing movie reviews, TV reviews, things of that nature. And I broke it down into different genres or different franchises. I had like a main catch-all and had some different sites for Star Wars, for Harry Potter, for Lord of the Rings, like that. One of the ones I had was for V. I developed it really, really as much as I could. I had character databases, I had episode reviews, I had all sorts of that. Everything had to do with the franchise. To the point where it actually became probably probably the most popular website that I had, especially on it's called Second Views, was the name of the overall website. The Second Views/V was the V website. Now, because I developed it so much, I realized that like with something like Star Wars, how many pages are there of Star Wars? How many shows about Star Wars? I'm not adding a whole lot to the game except for my personal interaction with them. I mean, so it's that something, but you can get a lot of Star Wars news and content pretty much anywhere. V, not so much. To the point where I got a lot of people like would quote my site, talk about that, and interestingly enough, just as I was developing this show, trying to bring something back out, this website has been down since about, I don't know, maybe 2014, 2013, something. I let it go. I stopped updating it, and it was taken down. I didn't want to pay for it anymore, basically. Um, but just the other day, like last week, I got an email from someone in the UK who got a hold of my email address and asked me if my website was still up or the content was still available to someone. Maybe even could they buy it. And I was kind of taken aback by that, to buy the content, the database, for example. And I thought about it. I'm like, wow, this is a side I really should do this show. I mean, I'd been developing anyway. So hopefully I have enough in the tank to be able to introduce you to this and bring you along on this journey. Maybe learn something, and maybe I'll bring my website back if it was popular enough. So Scott, I believe it was Scott McElroy, I believe. If you're watching, this one's also for you. This first episode, I'm going to do basically a brief overview, how I'm going to work the show in general, and then I'll give you a brief overview of V. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a walk. Basically, what I'm going to do with this Star Wars, I'm going to do a media walk. Here we go from the beginning of the franchise and kind of in certain groups. I'm not going to go quite in chronological order. I'm going to go bulks of different parts of the sagas, like the TV, the miniseries, the books, the novels, the comics, and go through them all. Just to give a brief overview, maybe some personal recollections, maybe some interviews, maybe some tidbits of information, some anecdotes you might know, anecdotes you might not know. I also will probably add something else into the middle of it, maybe a character. I'll go to character highlight, things of that. And I will also have a segment, there's a segment that will be as needed called V News. So this is trying to be probably a weekly show or so. Probably not going to get to use that very much. But the fact that I have it lets you know that there is possibly something still in the works, but I will get there. The very first episode I'm going to do is going to be basically now an overview of the show and of what the specific things I'm going to be bringing up and talking about and re-experiencing with you, seeing what we can come up with. So you know what? Let's get right to it. Beginnings of V, created by Kenneth Johnson. He is the writer, creator, director of a lot of the great 70s and 80s shows. He did The Bionic Woman. He did The Incredible Hulk. And beyond V, he also later on did the Alien Nation TV series, which is a big hit for him as well. And they're all uh, great pieces of work, very creative at the time. And he wrote V in 1983. That's when I first broadcast. I'm not sure exactly when he started writing it. He had the idea of making a book about the rise of fascism. Uh, and it took inspiration from a Sinclair Lewis book called It Can't Happen Here, about the rise of fascists in the middle of America and how we would respond to that. Kind of interestingly enough, kind of timely now in a way. Um, but also from there, we went to an allegory of Nazi Germany as well. They wanted to try and talk about different aspects of how this stuff could happen in the United States of America and it might be worldwide. The initial pitch was not, I don't know if it was well received, but it wasn't picked up. They didn't want to do anything about it really until, given the year 1983, you had Star Wars, you had Battlestar Galactica, you had Star Trek, you had all sorts of sci-fi. Sci-fi was kind of a big deal at the time. It was trying to really cultivating a large following in very different ways. So Kenneth Johnson kind of reimagined it and reimagined the story instead of having a human, like a Soviet incursion or fascism in America. Why not make it an alien invasion, but done subversively, like his story would tell? So I just shifted it to the sci-fi side, and all of a sudden, it was picked up almost immediately. NBC is the one who aired V in the beginning, and it was pitched as a event miniseries. Now, these were back in the day. This is much more commonplace nowadays. You don't really have these event miniseries. I mean, there's Netflix shows, there's streaming shows, there are some streaming event shows that have like 6 episodes and things. It's kind of like what it was back then. But back then, you had for example, V was a 4-hour miniseries, 2 episodes. You kind of had great, a sprawling, great tale chock full of a large cast. And I don't want to go too far into detail of the original miniseries because that's going to be my first real episode. I'm going to go and tackle the first part of the original miniseries in 1983. Now, it was a smash success. They had great marketing. It was highly received, and almost immediately, NBC wanted a sequel. And Kenneth Johnson was all too happy to provide that sequel. However, there became the famous creative differences, and the original writer-director Kenneth Johnson left during the making of V: The Final Battle, and NBC decided to continue with him. Now, that was probably the worst mistake the franchise ever made, unfortunately. V: The Final Battle ended up being a 3-part miniseries, 6 hours. But that was actually still pretty good. It had some markings of Kenneth Johnson. There definitely were some different directions taken that I will discuss again. I get to that. I should actually show you the images, huh? Why not? I got the images of the original V. We had the original V, the original miniseries. This is the DVD cover, or is it? Yes, we have. I wish I had some posters up there that actually had, but I'll talk about that later on. The miniseries was V: The Final Battle. Not much different, but anyway, it was still a great show. It still had the same overall feel, even if it became a little more, I'd say, soap opera, a little more sci-fi, less about the original tale of subversion. But it still had a basis. Now, after V: The Final Battle came out, it was just as much of a big success as the original miniseries. NBC, of course, said, you know what? Let's just go all the way with it. We want to make this a weekly series. Brendan Tartikoff tried to woo Kenneth Johnson back into the fold and was unsuccessful again because Kenneth showed interest about maybe coming back and working out differences and seeing what they could do. But Kenneth didn't want to make a weekly show. He thought it was not the right way to do his story. He had pitched something that might sound familiar to Alien Nation fans rather. He wanted to do instead a couple of hours, like 2 to 3, maybe 4 big, like 2-hour movies in a year. It would be an interesting way to do TV. Hadn't really been done much. You had, instead of having a weekly series or even an annually mini series, every couple months you have a 2-hour episode of something. Kind of more like continuing the event show. It was kind of remarkable, but Brandon Tarkatoff, in his vision, did not see that as being feasible. And unfortunately, again, it's to my regret, to everybody's regret, really, because I would like to have seen how it would have worked with V. It did work a lot later on with Alien Nation to some degree, although it was never as big of a success as the original V either. So there's that, either this or that at this point. So they forged ahead without Kenneth Johnson, though, as networks are tend to do, and we got V, the weekly series. Now, it's kind of funny that when V went from the original miniseries, which is so lauded, critically acclaimed, it's such an amazing series. By the time it got to the weekly series, by the end of the weekly series, it limped to a finish. It was one season. It had 19 episodes and one unfilmed episode. And by the end, it was more funny, and you like it for the wrong reasons. Let's put it that way. Got a lot more campier. They slashed the budget. It was the most expensive show on TV. They started slashing the budget, which means they cut off a lot of characters. That even give characters weeks off. They use a lot of stock footage. Actually, that becomes a humorous event. I'll just tell you, I'll be one of my bits when I start on the weekly series. Spot the stock footage throughout the series. So it was kind of really a bad disgrace. And if you ever watch this through now, you watch it and maybe not understand why I liked it so much. I was a kid. I fell for it. I just liked laser guns and I like the characters and I just want to see it continue. At the end, the show was canceled to the creators' shock, supposedly, and I'm not sure how they were shocked because this was, I think almost anyone could have seen it coming. But so it was left on a hangover, on a cliffhanger, rather. Hangover. That's me. I get hangovers. Cliffhanger. Cliffhanger, and it was never to be resolved. That was unfortunate. But the story would continue. I branched off some of the things we're going to talk about now. It did branch off right away to novel form. Many authors were given the chance. They had, first of all, Anne A.C. Crispin got a chance to novelize the full miniseries, both the V and V the Final, into one large book, and that was successful. Beyond that, when that was successful, the book company, I don't have the name off the top of my head. I have to look it up, but I'll look it up when we get to the books. I think it was Tor, maybe, but TOR. But they would give authors the chance to write their own tale, sometimes involving the characters, sometimes not, sometimes having different cities that have, since V was based in Los Angeles for the most part. They wrote, Howard Weinstein and A.C. Crispin actually wrote a book called The East Coast Crisis, which was New York, took place during New York during the original miniseries and V the Final Battle. The rest of the series, some of them were pitches of how they thought the weekly series would be. So there was some kind of conflicts and of continuity issues and everything else. But some of them were cool. Some of them also took the advantage of taking it to different cities, different towns. They had Chicago, they had Texas. Someone even went to Tokyo and London and showed different aspects of the war. Some were better than others, but it was all good fun. I mean, they weren't they're not talking like award-winning novels here, but they were fun. Like just like the Star Trek novels were, just like the Star Wars novels were. If you wanted to like get involved, you could find out more. There's also these storybooks, these little picture type books that are done. I'll mention those a little bit, although I haven't really done much with them. But beyond that, also at the same time, DC Comics got a hold of the rights and they started publishing their own comic book V. Marv Wolfman was heavily involved in getting the rights to do that. That comic book went 18 issues before it too was canceled. They was canceled in like 1986, which is about a year after this TV series canceled. DC did try to get the rights to continue the story from the cliffhanger, but for whatever reason they were denied, and maybe they were trying. I think the V might have been trying to figure out a way to do a final movie or something that never came to fruition. Beyond that, the next project that came up were attempts to revitalize it. And there were several attempts to revitalize it over the years. The most famous of this time frame, I'll have to check again, but I believe it was the late 80s, maybe even 90. J. Michael Straczynski, well-known, famous sci-fi writer, a developer of Babylon 5 and a lot of other wonderful projects. He just pitched a continuation called V: The Rebirth. It was going to be another mini series, hoping to spawn yet another their television series. Unfortunately, it was deemed too expensive to make, so it was rejected and left to wither. J. Michael Straczynski at one point thought of making it into a novel himself, but he never did. However, I will be able to review and talk about the first couple of acts, because the first couple of acts J. Michael Straczynski did let they put on an alt news group at a time, and so I have a copy of the script. It's kind of very interesting. It takes a definitely sequel based to what had happened. A lot of the characters were different, but the whole basis was a lot of different characters. The main characters from the previous incarnation were all explained pretty much off, except for one character, which again we'll talk about. But that was an interesting take on some things. But then again, it just didn't work out. Now, what happened next was Kenneth Johnson himself started to try to revitalize, bring interest back into it some way. We weren't sure exactly what that meant, but initially he wanted to do a sequel to his original miniseries. Kenneth Johnson was famous for saying he never watched V the Final Battle, except for one small part where it had gone terribly awry, he said, and he knew he didn't want to watch the rest of it. I don't know how it would have done a weekly series. He probably would have had to watch it if he had come back and done the series or the series of movies. But he decided that in his mind, nothing ever existed outside of everything was non-canon except for his original 1983 miniseries. He wanted to make a sequel to that, direct sequel to that, 20 years, 10 or 20 years later on, hopefully using the same actors. But he has a hard time. He's had a hard time. This is an ongoing issue now. Hard time finding the right funding. He's been working on it for years now. I mean, I'm talking since the early 2000s. It's not quite been done yet, but he is still working on something, and I'll get there because there's a little bit of a break in here. But at one point, he decided that he didn't have the right pitch to make to the networks or to the movie companies to make the sequel. So he decided to write the sequel, write a novel. So this became while there were 16 original novels back in the day, this was a new novel called V the Second Generation. This was the plot basically of his new sequel, which would have been, like I said, a direct sequel to V, the original miniseries. He tried to do that. That didn't work either. He still didn't get the quite the right funding for that. They had the same characters, some new characters, a lot of old characters. He even, I don't know, pointedly brought in some characters that had not made it through the original, or through the final battle, rather, in the weekly series. But he still kept trying to make it. Now, at one point, networks were much more interested in doing a reboot. So maybe Kenneth would change his mind, maybe remake the original miniseries, and then maybe they would let him do the second generation after that. So I don't know how that would have worked. It would have been younger actors replacing the original actors, and maybe the original actor would have come back for the second generation, so it would have been the proper time and they would be the proper age. I'm not sure. But again, he struggled with it. Networks were passing on it until ABC decided they were interested in it, but they didn't know what they wanted. But they decided to not go with Kenneth Johnson's property. And since it was Warner Brothers had the rights to V to a degree, to a certain degree, they decided to go on their own reboot. That's what led us to the 2009 series V. It was very different. It was completely a reboot, redesign, reimagining of the franchise. Not at all almost anything like the original. I mean, there were some conceptual similarities, and there were some eventual castings that were nods to the original. It lasted 2 seasons, one full season, and then the second, like, somewhat shorter season. 42, unfortunately, was canceled. I thought it was good. I thought it was a quality show. If it was a little bit too much of a slow burn, I think, and that was part of the problem. But again, I'll get into that later on when we do the actual episode by episode walkthrough. At that point, you would think it's over. But no, Kenneth Johnson has been still working on bringing V to the big screen. That's his goal right now. He has made some progress. He actually signed up with a financial company at one point. The last news was that he had signed up with a company called Desilu to finance the new V movie. That was the idea. That's what we were going to go with. Unfortunately, there came notes earlier last year during the summer, where it turns out that it was a scam of a company. They weren't actually producing the financing, and it was not a good situation for Kenneth. But he did have producing partners. He still has them in in tow. Producing partners John Hermanson, Barry Upper, and Ken W. Johnson, who's not actually a relation. But during that time frame, he had begun scouting, concept art, organizing production team, and starting pre-visualizations for the first of a trilogy of V the movie. I don't know if that went to V the movie would have been the V the original miniseries would have been trilogy, or the second generation would have been involved. It's not exactly been clear, but when it was discussed as a sham operation, kind of tried to look at the bright side, and all this stuff was done. So they still have a lot of the pre-work done. They also have a new producing partner recently. This is August of 2019. Ted Field, who has he had 40 movies in his credits: 3 Men and a Baby, to The Last Samurai, to the Riddick trilogy, to the Jumanji trilogy. So that was a big deal. Secondly, from that, Warner Brothers decided to re-release V on Blu-ray. It was a 2K scan of the original material, and it was released recently. And Ken Johnson went on the con tours with Mark Singer, who was the original Mike Donovan. It was a good sign for the Warner Brothers because it became the #1 bestseller less than a week after. Totally started the Warner Archive Company and became a great selling point to Kenny. Now I will say that Kenny has been one to I don't say misleading because he's not misleading at all. He's just gets overly excited and very overly optimistic about things. So that's the best way to say it. So will we ever see Kenneth Johnson bringing B back to the screen finally as the movie? I hope so. I think he's the writer and the creator. His work was the best of the series by far. And if he can retell the story in a good way and maybe make the second generation for all of us, for all the actors get too old and unable to play the parts, I would be a big fan. But that is all the franchise that I have, all the franchise I'm going to cover in pldViews. If you are interested in anything like that, I hope you stick around. I hope you follow this show, hit that subscribe, and hopefully that like button. And starting next week, we'll delve right into the first episode of the original miniseries, and we'll go from there. I guess that's all I have for you today. Now, my Star Wars show, PLD 1138, will come out again on probably Saturday this week, or maybe even Friday, depending on when it does. No, Saturday probably. So of that. Again, PLD Projects is a developing channel. I'll have other content soon. Hopefully, I'll eventually have 3 to 4 episodes a week, short form content of some kind. And I hope you're coming along for the ride. It should be fun. And if you have any suggestions, anything you want me to talk about, anything you want to see, a show you might want me to develop a franchise on, I'm happy to do so. Happy to at least entertain it and go from there. So, as of now, Prete Nama, which is the viewer for peace, and have yourselves a great day, great week, great everything. Bye now.